What's up, guys? I'm SaltEMike, and this is your week in review for January 13th, 2020. This is our first week in review in 2020. Thanks for letting me take a week off last week. My brother was in town, and it was really nice to just spend some time with family. And I think probably most years I'll be taking that week off, considering that Star Citizen isn't really coming out with anything during that time of year at all. I mean, there's very little talk about Star Citizen during that time. So unless there's like some interesting things going on in game, most likely we'll be taking next year around that time off. What's going on with the game currently is it's not in the best state. The last couple days I played, I haven't had too many 30k errors, but a lot of people are consistently getting server crashes and server disconnections. And on top of that, a lot of other bugs related to the database, and definitely some server-side OCS stuff with NPCs and things like that, right? Now, for me, the game is mostly fun. I think a lot of the additions to the game have been really great. In my opinion, the game's probably in the best state that it's ever been, aside from these issues. So when are these issues going to get fixed? The team's been back at work for 2 weeks. In previous history, we would have likely already had a patch by now. Honestly, we probably would have had a patch before the team went on vacation in previous years. But I think we're going to talk a little bit about this later on when we talk about Star Citizen Live. But the team is very seemingly to be focused on date-driven releases and a lot less on these free-flowing kind of bug-fixing patches and little additions and things that they're throwing in there from time to time. So the next patch we're going to get is 3.8.1, and I believe the first time we ever heard about 3.8.1 and these other ship drop patches that were finishing all the ships related to 3.8 was somewhere towards the end of January. We're in mid-January now, so maybe a couple weeks before we even see that. So that is kind of that for patch notes discussions, because there's really nothing to discuss since we won't be getting any for the foreseeable future. I mean, maybe for the next 1 or 2 weeks in review, we won't be really having much to discuss with the patch notes, but I will say on my live stream this morning that a couple devs stopped by and asked me to try and reproduce a few bugs that they're running into issues with, so hopefully some positive things coming from that with 3.8.1. Now, moving on to roadmap updates, we don't really have anything to discuss, and at this time of year, there usually isn't anything to discuss. Now, we can hope that next year that the roadmap is something that's more reliable than it was in the past year, and going back into those not those date-driven releases. They weren't very date-driven last year, and this year I think they absolutely plan on doing that. So we're going to see some adjustments because of that, which doesn't really make any sense to me, since the roadmap should be date-driven and should have been probably correct if you were going to stick to your date-driven releases. But as always, at the beginning of the year, we're going to get some shifts. And again, on Star Citizen Live, since that was really the only content that we had this week, was some small discussion on this where Todd Pappy kind of hinted at the changes are coming. And I don't know how drastic they will be, but they are definitely coming. Then, obviously, moving on to video updates. Before we get into Star Citizen Live, something interesting came up. It was a Spectrum post from Jared talking about Calling All Devs coming back, and this is pretty exciting. It was one of my favorite shows. I think it has a lot bigger reach than all of the other shows and allows the community to ask a lot of wide variety of questions. I think when they say, these are the discussion topics that we're going to discuss this entire week, I don't think that that's fair to the Star Citizen community, especially just for a game like Star Citizen that's so big, so many things going on, so many moving parts, so many different features that people find interesting that I may not, somebody else might find completely interesting, right? So then you have a wide variety of discussion topics for a show like Calling All Devs, and yeah. We're going to let Jared kind of explain a little bit more about it, but it might not exactly be the same.
What we love about that format is that it gives our players a place to speak directly to a broad array of developers and not just the ones that we can get here on a Friday. But we always want to improve on what's come before and not just keep repeating the same notes. So the timing of this program, the specific length, even the name of the program, they're all up for grabs. Basically, we're all developing that right now, so stay tuned for more information. You're going to hear more about what we're doing as soon as we have it figured out.
My guess here is that it's going to be something similar to 10 for the Chairman, where they have the screen name of the player who asked the question, and the dev answering it. And that gives them a lot more freedom, that a dev can answer a question on his lunch break real quick, just pop the webcam on, answer the question, record it, send it over to Jared, right? I think that's a lot simpler than having to have Jared ask the questions and say silly jokes. I don't think that that's the point of a show like that, right? You could save that kind of stuff for Star Citizen Live, but or Inside Star Citizen even. But for a show like Calling All Devs, we have a question to ask. We would like it answered to the best of the developer's ability. And personally, I don't really want anything else than that. I don't want any additions from someone like Jared or any other host. I just want to hear it straight from the dev, right? And I think that that would be really cool. What do you want to see kind of Calling All Devs look like in the future, if that's even what it's going to be called? So now moving on to Star Citizen Live. The first thing they talked about was obviously server-side OCS. This was the biggest update of the patch, and it is also the biggest update that's causing the most issues. So the show kind of started out with a few questions on that, specifically about the lack of improvements that the backers are seeing with its implementation. And Todd touches on why that might be the case here.
Obviously, with SOX being introduced, that was fundamental technology that touched everything. So every team had work to do for SOX, and every team will have work to do for server meshing. And so right now, with the release of SOX, our server frame rate isn't at the level that we want it to be at. And when it does run at that level, then the AI works the way that you would see in kind of a normal single-player game. However, when it's running at 6 frames a second or somewhere around there, then we start getting into some packet loss and other issues that make the AI look wonky.
I think the key point here is that it clearly touches everything, and every single team had some work to do for server-side OCS, and similarly, it's going to be happening with server meshing as well. So 6 FPS on a server, when expectations pre-patch were that it could possibly hit 30, there's some major issues here that need to be worked out, obviously. And one of the largest issues I've been seeing from from time to time, and we've been seeing it in previous patches, but it seems to be significantly worse in 3.8, is desync. And Todd gives some insight onto this as well.
It really comes down to frame rate, and we do prediction, and sometimes that prediction, is wrong, and so then once we get that packet back, then we teleport them to the right spot. But obviously, with it running so slow, then we are going to have those issues, and until we can actually break the back of that, then unfortunately, we will be continuing to deal with that.
And while that's not a very positive thing to hear in the sense that we may be dealing with desync for a lot longer, it's nice to hear that there is a cause that they're aware of, and the solution is resolving a lot of the issues with server-side OCS. So, it's nice to hear those things, and it's refreshing to hear those things. Just kind of brutal honesty is nice coming from Star Citizen more. So I enjoyed that, and I hope we get more of that throughout the show and in the future. So the conversation moved on to a topic that I'm interested in seeing iteration for, and that's ship-to-ship combat, whether it's PvE or PvP, specifically how viable auto gimbals are over fixed and just regular gimbal weapons.
Players are finding that auto gimbal is the clear and obvious choice of most encounters. Well, their opinion, although I might kind of agree with it. Will we see some attention to making fixed weapons a competitive option?
Yes. So just too long didn't read, yes. With auto gimbal, and even then we've created a team called Vehicle Experience Team, which will be focusing on some of these issues that we're having. And in particular looking at the combat distances and just the combat experience in general, looking at how the missiles aren't working the way that they need to be working, looking at turrets, how they're not working the way that they need to be working, and then just overall balancing of the features and how the coolers and the quantum drives and all these other gameplay items fit on the ship and how they all play together. So that is their main focus of going through and looking at combat and making sure that we're, right now, I would consider us very much a pixel hunter, and I would prefer it to be much more intimate, as far as play style. So we're playing around with that and trying to see the combat distances and what we can bring them into and what feels right. I think Chris has his idea of what it is, John Crew has his idea, I have my idea, and so we're just trying to mesh those together and see what comes out.
Now specifically, we've been hearing comments exactly like these since 3.5 and 6. We're seeing very little iteration besides some component changes. And, getting these feeling better are a must in 2020 for me. And, I'm just quite frankly tired of hearing about it, and I'm ready to start seeing and feeling these changes come to ship combat. And I think we've seen some changes to quantum drives and shields in the past, but we're not seeing those significant changes to make combat a lot more fun. And I really hope that that's a big priority for them in 2020, and it seems like it might be. But again, I want to hear a lot less talk on that, and I want to see a lot more kind of movement in that direction. Something we hoped would change with 3.8 was wipes, and it looks like we're going to get one, and getting it soon.
Well, we need to be able to take a look at how players earn money. We know that there's an exploit there right now that people are earning crazy amounts of alpha UEC, and so anything that was earned during that time, we're going to have to wipe.
There's the ship duplication bug and stuff like that.
Exactly. So we will have to wipe. That's the whole point of, until we go final, we need to work out the kinks of everything. And there are definitely a lot of issues, and there are things that we have to be able to reset.
Wipes are clearly inevitable. They always were going to be, because they have to test the economy, right? And Todd makes it clear that that's a reason why. And he also makes it clear why we have to have a wipe now. There's a big kind of exploit that needs to get closed up, and unfortunately that would kind of ruin their data for figuring out how the economy would work. So I guess we have to wipe and start fresh, but hey, that's kind of how it is. And we'll just go into this last clip here. And this is what I find really interesting. And this is what we were discussing a little bit about the roadmap and kind of future releases for Star Citizen, and maybe how different 2020 might be from 2019.
Will we see quality of life patches for 3.8 or strictly the new ship content patches?
For 3.8.1, you'll definitely see some quality of life fixes. Basically, we don't want to mess up our feature development time too much. So we have what we consider live must fixes, or things that are associated with the gameplay experience that I've already gone through and triaged, and then we'll be focusing on those. And then obviously anything that doesn't make it there, then we'll go into 3.9. But the way that, and you guys kind of saw it last year where we weren't so strict on our feature lock date, and what that did is that kind of cascaded into releases not going out on time. Now, Aaron and I are very strict on our feature lock date, and that basically comes in the middle of February this year. So then that means that basically from now until mid-February, this is features that will be worked on, and some of them had already been started in 3.8 and even 3.7. And this is when everything comes together and that feature is locked and it's ready to go out.
Now, they did not stick to date-driven releases last year. That's very clear. We ran into a lot of late patches and adding features in super late, specifically with like ship interdiction and stuff like that. Like that was not cool. It was not a cool year at some points in 2019. And but I will be taking what Todd says here with a grain of salt, because with the start of Pillar Talk last year, we had the same conversation that date-driven releases, if it doesn't make it in by our go no go meeting, it's not coming in. And yeah, okay, that didn't happen in 2019. I hope they stick to their guns here on for 2020. We'll have to see though. And if they stick to it, my expectations is that we'll see a lot less content and feature work in 2020, but we're going to have a lot better game experience in terms of bugs and issues and instability. So, you know, it's kind of comes down to, is what's in the game interesting enough for you right now? I know it is somewhat interesting for me, and creating some things like reputation maybe, and some more quality of life fixes in terms of like PvP and player versus player just interactions, whether they're aggressive or not, could make the game really interesting. So I'm really looking forward to the future roadmap updates whenever they happen, to kind of see what 2020 might look like. And moving on to some like miscellaneous updates here, there was a PTU test, and it tested 60 players instead of 50 players. And I had a discussion with my stream that, what's the big deal? It's just 10 players. But when you really think about it, it's 20% more players. And that could cause weird things like memory leaks and things like that. So, you know, moving from 60 to 75 to 100 to 200, this might be the first step to multiple steps to get more players in. And we'll kind of see what happens. And Star Citizen also hit another milestone of 2.5 million accounts. I never really look at that number as a big deal. It was something that I saw on Reddit while I was breezing by, and it kind of makes me giggle, but I have like a lot of accounts. So like I have an org account, I have an account for my starter series, which keep an eye out for that. I think you'll probably see a video on that tomorrow actually. And I have multiple other accounts for other various reasons. So the amount of accounts on the website is not necessarily representative of the amount of players that are playing Star Citizen by any means, or even interested in Star Citizen at this point. So just something like to look at and go, oh wow, cool, but that's really it. And with that, I'll probably leave you guys with this video. Again, it's another quiet week for Star Citizen. I expect these weeks to start picking up with the advent of Star Citizen Live coming back, as well as future calling all devs, hopefully. So we'll hopefully have a lot more information to discuss here in the near future, and as we push into 3.9. So thank you so much for watching, guys, and I will see you next week.